Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar hosted by the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Our topic today is getting your board on board, how to facilitate digital transformation conversations. My name is Marc Spiotta. I'm the General Manager of Tech for Social Impact here in Microsoft Philanthropies. And I'm joined today by two fantastic guests, Ben Sand, CEO from the Contingent, and Chantal Forster, AI strategy resident for the Annenberg Foundation. Chantal and Ben, thanks so much for joining me today, and really looking forward to the discussion. Before we jump in, I'll take a moment and just sort of set a little bit of context on the discussion today and the backdrop for this discussion. As we're all aware, we're living in somewhat unprecedented times right now. Many of the organizations that we work with, work for, support, are really trying to navigate their way through what right now is a shifting landscape, largely fueled by changes in U.S. federal policy, which are affecting programs and funding and the whole geopolitical landscape in some regard. And that's not lost on us. And so we'll try and make our conversation relevant for the times today. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Microsoft Tech for Social Impact and our organization. Hopefully you're familiar with our company mission. We are focused on empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And in Microsoft Philanthropies and in Tech for Social Impact, we really consider ourselves to be on the tip of the spear of that critical effort for the company. Microsoft has a long, will be a 50-year history of participating and being a part of understanding what our role in society needs to be. Some examples of the way that in which we contribute more broadly. You can take a look at some of the most recent stats from this last year of our operations. But in philanthropies in particular, we have this organization called Tech for Social Impact, which has been in existence for about 7 years now. Christina, if you want to advance for me. Thank you. Tech for Social Impact is focused on enabling and empowering the not-for-profit and social impact organizations around the planet. We work today with about 400,000 organizations globally. When you look at the scope of our work and the components of it, Tech for Social Impact really focuses in 3 categories. Number one, we provide our constituents, the organizations that we work with the right technology through our not-for-profit licensing program to help ensure in a very equitable fashion that everybody that's participating in philanthropic efforts has access and enablement around what we believe to be the best technology platform on the planet to fuel these missions. We also provide skilling at scale for not only for the constituents that our partners in this space serve, but also for these organizations themselves. This year in particular, we have a very strong focus on digital enablement as it relates to data, security, and of course, artificial intelligence. Lastly, Tech for Social Impact is involved in many of the partnerships that Microsoft participates in across the sector. And this comes in many different shapes and forms, including joint efforts around mission-oriented work, as well as enablement efforts. When we look at the landscape that our constituents and the organizations that we serve are facing today, many challenges, many opportunities. Artificial intelligence has been kind of put at the forefront of discussion of late, and understandably so in many ways. We're seeing wide-scale adoption of AI across the sectors that we serve in the not-for-profit space. Very specifically, we're seeing organizations that are seeing, I would say, relatively easy to achieve productivity gains, things like augmenting staff and helping to increase response times and both vertical and horizontal processes across their organization. We're also seeing more and more the opportunity that AI brings around bringing insights and gaining insights that can have mission impact related to better data strategy, better data management. And so we'll talk about that today in some regard as we go through our discussion. Along with these opportunities, of course, there are challenges, and we'll talk a lot about that today. Many organizations are really finding their way through the AI journey. Some have navigated and are beginning to experiment and even use in production AI use cases. Many organizations are still wondering about how to think about governance, how to think about making sure that they have the right guardrails and policies in place to protect their data, to be aligned with their values, to make sure that they're thinking about things like bias as they bring AI into their environment. Another enormous area of challenge is the skill sets required to really capitalize on this technology. Many organizations that we're working with today operate on let's just say less than optimally funded budgets with less than optimal staff. And so having the most productive and most knowledgeable resources is super critical in this effort. And then lastly, and arguably, equally as important, is how to put this technology to work. What are the scenarios in which not-for-profit organizations are seeing opportunities to fuel their mission and be more productive via AI? And so we'll go into those in more detail today as part of our discussion. With that being said, I would like to give both Ben and Chantal an opportunity to introduce themselves before we get into the discussion. So Ben, if I could ask you to take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself and the Contingent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining today, everyone. The Contingent is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Portland, Oregon. Our obsession is to wake up every day and ask, how can we mobilize the community at scale to serve kids and families, particularly impacted by the foster care system? And so if you want to go to the next slide, I've been recruiting foster parents and volunteers for the child welfare system, both in Oregon and now nationally, for the last 13 years. And for 7 years, my office was my car, and my existence was basically coffee meetings for days, using ground game strategies like lawn signs and setting up a booth at the county fair. And in 2019, the state of Oregon asked if our organization would take over the responsibility for foster family recruitment. When we were asked that question, we were forced with an ethical dilemma. On the one hand, how do you say no? But on the other hand, how do you say yes if you don't actually believe that you have a solution that can meet the need? And that's when we went all in with Microsoft and with Tech for Social Impact to develop a new kind of innovative solution using data and technology, what we call the air game approach to community mobilization, which is designed to complement the good work that organizations are doing on the ground. So I thought I would just give you a very high-level overview as to our use case, both for how we're using data and technology as well as AI to improve outcomes for kids and families. So next slide. Currently, we oversee the foster family recruitment responsibility for multiple states across the country, the state of Tennessee, the state of Arkansas, and the state of Oregon. This has all kind of grown in the last couple of years, and there's a queue of like 10 states that we're in discussions with. And one of the things that we always start with when we're talking to a state is trying to really understand the research method to understand the problem. No amount of data or technology can really solve the wrong question. And getting the right questions is important. So we start with a gap analysis where we understand who are the kids in foster care, what are their defining characteristics, how many homes do we currently have. We then take that information and combine it with a study of foster families over a 5-year period, where we want to understand who are what we call +2 foster families. +1 is a family that's able to accomplish placement stability. Another +1 is a family that's able to accomplish permanency. We then aggregate all of the +2 families in any given state, and we study them. We want to understand who they are, their ethnicity, their income, their consumer behavior, geography, family size. And then we create typologies. When we understand both the problem and then understand who's historically been successful, what we want is high scoring, leads, and that's our target. Want to make sure that we're finding families for the right children that are impacted by foster care. And so if you go to the next slide, what we then take with this kind of research information is we then begin to acquire large sets of metadata where we are trying to identify all of the people that live, let's say, in the state of Tennessee that look like families who have historically been successful. With that information, we create data lakes, which are like large reservoirs that stores large volumes of data. And that's where AI has really transformed our ability to talk to very specific individuals in very specific zip codes about very specific needs of children. And our use of AI around informed target marketing has allowed us to talk to people at scale and to solve very specific problems for individual children. And so as leads are coming forward and being cultivated, we can accurately recruit families, not just more families, but the right families for the right kids. And so last slide, as a form of kind of high-level summary, our conviction is as an organization in our AI use case is that by asking the right questions and gathering the right information, storing that securely, AI is giving us the ability to derive insights, to make micro adjustments on a weekly basis. And one kind of outcome, kind of anecdotal outcome is right now, we measure both all of the leads that we get for foster families that are being generated on the ground through ground game recruitment, and we also juxtapose that against what this capability has given us the ability to do. And through the use of data and technology and safe, smart, ethical AI, the air game is currently outperforming the ground game 9-1. And so we have transformed our results, and we have created a predictive model that helps states make informed decisions about how to serve kids and families impacted by foster care. So that's a high-level overview of our particular AI use case. Mark, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. No, I was just saying thank you, Ben, and I love the passion for the work that you guys do, and look forward to digging into more of that in just a moment. Chantal, could you tell us a little bit about your background and some of the work you do, both for the foundation and otherwise, in your capacity as an AI strategy advisor?
I'd love to. Hi, everyone. So I'm Chantal Forster. I serve as the AI strategy resident for the Annenberg Foundation based in LA. And I'd love to, it's particularly rewarding for me to be talking about AI with you because I actually started my career in predictive AI about 20 years ago, working for SPSS on data mining platforms. And so to come full circle and to now be talking about and advising the philanthropic sector on generative AI is particularly fascinating. And so one of the things I'll say as also the former executive director of the Technology Association of Grantmakers is we are learning a great deal, but there is still so much further to go. What you see on screen here is a framework for responsible AI adoption in philanthropy that I co-authored with Project Evident about 2 years ago, right when Gen AI was hitting us. And we've made some progress in the philanthropic sector, but there's a good deal more evolution to go. And so I want to share 3 things with you on the following 3 slides about what I'm learning as an advisor to several foundations, but primarily as the AI strategy resident at the Annenberg Foundation. So headline number 1, the AI story in philanthropy is largely a story of shadow AI. Many foundations believe that, for example, their staff are not using AI because it hasn't officially been provisioned, or they might believe that they're only using the tool that has been provisioned. The reality is, if you survey foundation staff anonymously, you will find anywhere from 60 to 80% of foundation staff are using AI tools on an independent basis. They're using free versions of tools that they might have found on the market. They are largely using those tools, unfortunately, without governance. So as you see here on this slide with data from the Tech Association of Grantmakers, while 80% of staff report experimentation with AI, 30% of those foundations have an AI policy, just 30%. And just 9% of foundations have an AI policy and an AI steering or oversight group. So in other words, just 9% have adequate guardrails for AI usage within their organizations. So that's headline number one on the current state of AI in philanthropy. It is largely ungoverned. So in my work as an advisor, here's what I do. I work foundations through this process of, number one, acknowledging, listening and acknowledging where they are and where their staff are on the journey with AI. It does involve a lot of anonymous surveying, listening and learning, discovery, and then sometimes concurrent with that, actually creating the guardrails for AI usage. Very quickly, I like to move into providing training for staff in a variety of ways, training that meets people where they are, whether they have low data and tech literacy or high data and tech literacy. Kind of a customizable, personalized training regime that meets people where they are. And then we can move into a place where we start to develop incremental pilots that build awareness and skill before we move into some big plays. Now, there are several foundations that are using the moment of AI as a moment to catalyze an innovation culture in their organization. And so the Annenberg Foundation is one such organization, and it's been particularly wonderful to use this moment of AI to build internal skill and capacity for innovation. So then the last thing I want to share, and I know we're going to move into a discussion with the all parties present and the other panelists here. Oh, I don't know if you've heard of the work of board.dev. So relevant to our conversation today, board.dev is actively working on developing technology literacy and strategy at the board level. So when we think about how to build up the board's awareness, part of that is who we recruit for the boards of our nonprofits, our foundations. And so board.dev is helping to make the case, and I serve on the Congress for them, to provide tools for boards to make the case and begin recruiting for more tech literacy, strategic literacy on the board level, because then that trickles down into adequate funding for technology, adequate funding for the strategy for technology, including AI. And so with that, I'll pause and Marc will guide us into the next part of our webinar today.
Awesome. Thank you, Chantal. And I think you exposed a number of criteria facets of the topic here that I think we'll go into more detail on. As we get going here, I just want to let all of our participants know that we do have a chat feed. So thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Tina, for participating, and feel free to do so throughout the session. If you have a specific question that you'd like us to address, there is a Q&A chat as well. So please enter your question. We'll make sure that we try to address it. As I pose this first question, we're going to make this a little bit of user interaction here. We have a little poll that we'd ask our participants to respond. We just want to get a sense for kind of where you are in your dialogue with your stakeholders and leadership around AI. So please take a moment and give us an answer to the question here. And as we're doing that, just kind of picking up on some of the themes that came out from your introductions there, Chantal and Ben, there is this sort of two-sided coin to how to think about moving forward with AI in terms of, Chantal, you mentioned sort of the shadow use of it today. Ben, you called out many of the areas where, people can see impact. They can see the opportunity for impact. And so on the one hand, there's value to jumping in and starting to put these technologies to work. At the same time, and as we, there's sort of this backdrop of a need for the right governance, and really an area that we're all, learning through as individuals, as organizations, as a sector. So, the question that I would ask is, when you think about that idea of, what comes first, governance or adoption, what are your thoughts on the best approach? And maybe Ben, as someone who's deployed AI, maybe you could give us your perspective.
Yeah, happy to jump in. Thanks for that. Want to recognize that my answers are rooted in my experience. And so, so much of my entire career has been just like a nonprofit soldier, just trying to figure it out, for kids and families, working in a very constrained environment at times, and sometimes having some resources to invest. And so from the perspective of a nonprofit executive director, someone who might ascribe to being an entrepreneur. I would probably land more on the side of the nonprofit sector is already implementing these. The people that work in nonprofits are using these tools largely on the productivity side of things. And what we have to figure out is how to grade out the risk of when an implementation begins to compromise the trust that nonprofits benefit from in that kind of currency exchange of trust with the community. And so I would lean towards recognizing that implementation is already happening mostly on the productivity use case, and that there are so many opportunities to lean towards implementing before having to go towards trying to write a governance policy that may not necessarily even have a use case that's being considered. And so I think that there's a risk spectrum, and ultimately, most of the organizations that I know and people that work in the nonprofit sector are so far behind actually in being prepared to run their own use cases like the one that I've shared, that I don't want to pause them to have to go back and write a document that may not ever be used, but maybe think through this in terms of risk mitigation over stages, to not shut down the implementation of AI whole hog, if you will, but to figure out a method to peer through risk mitigation to move forward.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, Ben, and understand the merits behind that thinking and that approach. I mean, just from a Microsoft perspective, Tech for Social Impact, many of the organizations that we support, as you say, AI is there already. It's just a function of how much visibility do you have into how it's being used and who's using it. I'm curious, Chantal, you mentioned, I think you said 9% of foundations today have what you described as adequate governance in place. What are your thoughts about this chicken and egg scenario with regard to adoption and governance?
This is a great question, Ben. I love what you said. The people in nonprofits are already using AI, like realize that implementation is already happening. I've seen foundations, not the Annenberg Foundation where I serve as a resident, but I have seen foundations where there isn't an officially sanctioned tool, but people are pulling up their phones and using AI tools on their phones because they've been prohibited at the organization. They're using them anyway. So, I'd largely say I'm a bit of a renegade, so I'm not normally guardrails first. However, there's some interesting data coming out around gender differences in adoption of AI. A study out of University of Copenhagen showed that women tend to wait for official approval to use AI, whereas men will go ahead and adopt AI. Now, this was one study, I think it was corroborated by University of Chicago. For that reason, when I advise foundations and inclusion is a value of theirs in technology adoption, I tell them, you don't stop what's already happening, but let's front load your guardrail development because you are harming the women in your organization by not putting guardrails in place. At least a simple AI policy to start with. Recognize it will evolve, and every 3 to 6 months you will update the policy, but get something out there so that all staff feel as though they can be a part of this innovation cycle with emerging technology.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense as well, Chantal. You mentioned board literacy when you were talking about some of the work that you're doing today. Could you talk a little bit more about kind of where are, and I know it's a generalization, but where are the boards and sort of their journey, and what are some of the ways in which organizations can help to nurture that literacy within their leadership?
Mark, I'm assuming you pointed that question at me first, or?
Yes, please. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Sorry. Just a little follow-up.
Yeah. So what I would say, and this is a real struggle, okay? We have members of boards of directors that are inviting Otter AI into meetings and accidentally recording things that are being sent out to everybody after the meeting. So I will say that the current reality is most boards, at least on the philanthropic side, where I spend most of my time, they're in the same state of literacy as the average staff member.
Yeah.
To be honest. And that's part of our challenge in this sector. So I would suggest that part of your organizational capacity building with AI include the board. and not just philosophical, right? But I just led a training with an executive team at a foundation this morning, and there was a fork in the road in a presentation, and I said, would you like to talk about, a more philosophical framework next, or would you like to go hands-on with tools? And I'm so proud of this particular executive team. They said, let's go hands-on with tools. Your boards need to see these tools. They need to experiment with these tools. They need to understand the lived reality of the people on their staff and the nonprofits they serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chantal. Now, it was a little bit of a loaded question that I asked you because, the next topic that I want to raise with both of you is, and you referenced it, is sort of, doing an assessment or understanding where, your board or your stakeholders are in their own journey as it relates to AI. I know, again, through the lens of Tech for Social Impact, many of the organizations that we work with today, we find a champion or a hero within the organization that either understands the opportunity with AI or sees specific scenarios where they think value can be found. And a lot of the work that we're doing is in enabling them on helping them to navigate through not only coming up with some of the questions that we're getting in the chat, by the way, as it relates to how do I think about a policy and things of that nature, but also bringing their stakeholders along in that journey. So, I'm curious, when you think about kind of creating that virtuous cycle of having buy-in and then demonstrating some value from the technology, demonstrating that it can be managed in alignment with the values and the ethics of the company. How do you think about managing that sort of virtuous cycle? How do you think about kind of tracking the effectiveness of the implementation of AI, whether it's the ROI in the traditional sense of cost and cost savings, or through the lens of impact? Ben, you guys are down the path a bit on the journey. Could you tell us a little bit about some of your learnings there?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so certainly, nonprofits have a wide range of boards, from operating boards and folks that are helping run the organization to high governance boards and boards that really entrust the CEO to live into some of these policies, and every kind of board in between, right? So recognizing that there's definitely not a one size fits all. I can only speak from my experience, and that would be to say there is a moment for sure, where I think in our sector, we've got to ask the question of, first of all, who is comprising our board, right? So do we have someone on our board that actually understands where this is headed? And those folks are important to find, I think, in the days ahead, as nonprofits are considering using AI and using data and technology in a more robust way. So part of it's who's on the board, but I think from our perspective, we have a very robust 26-page AI governance policy document. The board wanted to know that was being created. The board didn't necessarily need to sign off on the details of that governance policy, recognizing that we are a little bit more on the high governance side of things. And so the board has placed and entrusted the CEO to execute on that. But what I would say that, as we were kind of investigating this question as to, everyone's got different perspectives on how we use data, how we understand the security of data. What is the difference between using AI to improve outcomes, and what is surveillance? What's the role of bias? These are big questions, and no individual on any board is going to answer those questions in the same way. So our approach, and one of the things I might recommend for the nonprofit colleagues on this call, our approach was to do the good work, the detailed work around a good policy, but to instead of kind of organizing this around an entire board meeting, what we actually did is hosted a dinner for our top investors and our board to have a thoughtful roundtable kind of salon dinner discussion about the use of data, technology, and AI and moving forward. I think it's a governance issue, but it's also a confidence issue with those that are investing in your organization. And I think we want to get ahead of it, as opposed to being exposed when there's a security breach, or having someone finding out I'm on this webinar and not even knowing the contingents involved in this, as an example. And so I think what's important is there's the socialization aspects of it that need to be matched with the governance. So some boards may very much want to approve the policy, understand it, and some boards might have a high degree of trust that those policies are being implemented. But either way, the socialization of these concepts the recognition that those with fiduciary and governance responsibility need to be informed is of utmost importance. I'll just say it's a lot more fun to have this discussion with a glass of wine around a dinner than it is to have in like a board meeting when everybody's looking at their watch and wondering like we're in the weeds of AI governance. So we chose to take the relational approach and found that paid dividends.
Great, thank you. Ben, I don't know if you've been tracking, but there's been several questions in the chat related to where do I get started with a policy. I know Chantal has shared an example. Christina from our team, Tech for Social Impact, has also shared some thoughts. I know that you have done extensive work in this area. Could you talk a little bit about your methodology behind a governance framework?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that our methodology is scalable. I mean, we are taking this so serious that we've brought on a senior fellow that oversees our AI practice. And there are some folks that I think could do that on a volunteer basis to really help you think through how to take some of the templates that TSI has developed around AI governance, for example, and to contextualize that in your organization. And so, we brought in somebody who was a product manager and oversaw AI at Intel. We have the benefit of being in Portland. That really got us to a very specific, very nuanced governance policy for our organization. But I do think that there are some great templates out there. I'm seeing some of those links in the chat. You might consider finding someone in your community that does bring an AI expertise to bear to audit your statement and ask those right questions about your particular either current or possible use cases. Because I think the policy, as any organization knows, the policy is one thing. It's a different thing to actually operationalize that. So in our policy, we have a committee of people that are looking at 4 different kinds of risks, at risk kind of go, no-go decisions around how we use AI, from no risk to this is such a risky use case that it's going to be prohibited no matter what because it will break trust. But there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen in a collaborative environment, I think, for that to occur. So it's not just the policy, but it's the right brains in the room to stage out how you analyze risk honestly against your technical capabilities. And that's a whole other component I won't go into now. But I would just say that for anyone that might want to learn a little bit from our organization, I'm certainly happy to share a little bit more of how we've gone about it as a follow-up, if that would be helpful.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. You mentioned many of the variables that need to be brought into consideration when you're thinking holistically about a governance policy. And there's whenever you're rolling out any kind of technology, there's the decades old adage of it's the people and the process, and there's more to it than just giving people access to technology. Looking at several of the comments in the chat thread, a lot of questions around what are the use cases, what are the scenarios where people are finding value, and happy to have follow-up conversations with anyone that would like to about and share with you some of the publicly available case studies that we've made now with regard to specific scenarios. I would say that from my vantage point, they tend to fall in kind of really two buckets. One is sort of horizontal value. So while they can add value, efficiency to a not-for-profit or a foundation, they're going to be value. That capability is going to be valuable in any type of organization. So that's very much about productivity gains. There are more vertically specific scenarios that are emerging as accessible in terms of ways that you can implement the technology, reasonable cost, reasonable timeline, and see a return for that investment. Things like grant making is one that pops up in particular. Contract management is another one, volunteer management. So lots of different scenarios are emerging. Chantal, back on this theme around the governance that's required. I know you and I had spoke earlier, and I asked about change management, and your response was that it really needs to be sort of threaded throughout. Could you talk a little bit more about how you think change management, what other aspects of organizational management need to be brought into the fold here to make this effective beyond just policy and technology?
Right, beyond just the policy and technology. I'm seeing even a question in chat that is related to this around I think it was Terry said something around, should given the disparate use cases? Should departments just run their own AI incubators, right? Or do we try to do this holistically? And to me, that's part of change management, organizational change management is with AI specifically, this is a complex technology with particularly virulent, if I can use that word, risks for data privacy and security. And so while yes, experimentation can happen, to be honest, I do think that organization-wide, an evaluation matrix, a set of criteria for evaluating AI tools is required, because one AI tool simply defined or corralled for use by, let's say, the finance team doesn't make it any less risky than an enterprise-wide tool. In fact, it is just as risky if your organizational data is compromised through that particular vertical. So I would suggest that AI is a moment where, as we are wrestling with this, it's not just a technology, it's a societal issue right now that we are grappling with. And so that does require an all hands on deck approach, in my opinion, at least in terms of how we agree to explore this, how we agree to govern this, how we agree to live our values through experimentation. For example, at the Annenberg Foundation, we did an all-staff exercise when we were setting up our principles for using AI. We translated responsible AI principles into language, into values for the staff. I should say staff translated it into their values. Inclusion, an inclusive approach to AI at Annenberg meant very concretely all staff get access to these tools, not just the cool kids, not just IT or comms, but all staff. And secondly, all staff get training that meets them where they are. So if I'm a highly data literate person, I might need one quick all staff training. If that's not the case for me, I'm going to need that all staff, and I'm going to need a one-on-one, and I'm going to need an ongoing set of training and supports. That was very important to the foundation, that we do not widen the digital divide in our organization because of AI. And so that's one example where organizational change is interwoven throughout the kind of tech change management piece specific to AI.
Yeah, thank you, Chantal. It's a great example, and one that, I would echo your sentiment that we see scenarios like that really almost anywhere where AI is being rolled out at scale. We did have a question in the chat, Chantal, not to put you too much on the spot here, but it's aligned with what we're talking about. I have a technology director on staff who is at her core vehemently opposed to the use of AI. She views it through the lens of creative professionals. She's a musician. And I would love some advice about helping her be more flexible in her thinking on how we use this technology for our nonprofit, the disability organization in this case. I would love your thoughts on that question. I would say that part of that change management, part of the cultural shift that's required is kind of understanding that not everybody's on the same page with this type of technology. But any thoughts or guidance on that one?
Yes, I have three quick thoughts there. I deal with this regularly with the foundations that I work with. A couple of things. Number one, most people don't know that they're already using AI. So if this IT director uses Google Maps, if she, I think it was a she, if she uses Alexa, if she uses Duolingo, if she uses Netflix, right? She's using AI and has been using AI for 10 years. So I think, first of all, just ground ourselves in the reality that because we don't see it or know doesn't mean that we're not already reliant upon this particular technology. So that's number one. There's an education, an educational component, a loving educational component there. I think that another component of this is understanding it is our responsibility in the social sector, if we are leading a nonprofit or we're leading a foundation, to grapple with the issues of our time. And right now, generative AI is one of the issues of our time. So to ivory tower ourselves, where we are disengaging in conversations that are happening in our society, is not what most of us believe our nonprofit mission to be oriented toward. And so I repeat that often at foundations, that we have a responsibility to wrestle with so that we can lead, in our sector through this period that we find ourselves in. And then the last thing I would say is, if there are use cases in AI that we as an organization don't think align with our values, then name those. For example, I work with one foundation where they're extremely concerned about environmental impact of AI. And so you know what we've done? We've added that to our policy. Our policy now says, avoid frivolous use of AI because we care about the environmental impact of AI. Ensure that the use cases in your workday offer real benefit and real and concrete value so that we are not frivolously wasting our planet's resources.
That's great. Thank you, Chantal. Great examples. Ben, I just, Chantal covered a lot there, but someone that's gone through the journey, you must have encountered some cultural roadblocks along the way. Can you talk a little bit about some of the learnings from the Chronicle? I'm sorry, the Contingent?
Yeah. I would just say, as someone maybe speaking for the little guy, the organization that's just trying to figure it out, from my perspective, the cultural shifts oftentimes have to do, especially if you're looking at making an investment moving forward, have to do with whether or not your current tech stack even works. I mean, most nonprofit organizations have zombie tech stacks where they have a 7-year-old CRM that doesn't talk to the donor management system, and their storage of their data storage, work, it doesn't work. And I think a lot of times what can kill this conversation is organizations that are making sweeping assumptions about what is and is not possible in light of the infrastructure that you have. And so I would caution any organization that maybe needs to make an investment first in your infrastructure before having a theoretical conversation about what's possible with AI to really consider some of the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And so, that is first and foremost. And I would say to the folks in philanthropy on this call as well, continuing to invest in organizations to really get that stack right. And I know this is not an advertisement for Microsoft, but our organization over the last 15 years has had 4 different CRMs. We had a failed implementation with Dynamics the first go around, which is on us, not on Microsoft. But getting it right and aligning your stack, your cornerstone CRM, to the Power Platform and to Azure, and getting the right prism to actually view this discussion through is a really critical component to building trust around this conversation. What we're going to see in the days ahead, really, is that we're going to have a lot more conversations about AI agents. We're going to see organizations that are going to be leapfrogging and moving at a breakneck speed because they got the fundamentals right. And so we're able to have a more sophisticated conversation around AI and cybersecurity and data storage and ethics and all of those things because the organization believes that we have our fundamentals right. So that would be my primary takeaway for any small to mid-sized nonprofit here, is that, before going out and having an ambitious roadmap developed around what's possible, get your fundamentals really, really solid.
Yeah.
And that will build the kind of trust that will have a positive culture around this conversation, juxtaposed to a lack of confidence that the organization even has a savvy approach to their current technical investment.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense, Ben. And follow-up question for you, coming again from the Q&A here. I know, again, looking through the lens of tech for social impact, virtually every organization that we work with in the not-for-profit sector, in philanthropy overall, has some degree of highly sensitive data, right? As a sector, second only to governments, the not-for-profit sector is targeted by bad actors through cybersecurity efforts and such. Question to you: working with foster children and the environment that you do, clearly you're talking about highly sensitive data. How did you bring that into your methodology as you rolled out your approach?
Yeah, and again, not to pump Microsoft too much here, but I would just say the thing that's really important about Azure in particular is that there's a lot of built-in thinking that goes into what you benefit from by having your data stored in the cloud, and so that's an example of a fundamental decision that you build in some security there. But what I would say is while you can make some solid cornerstone investments to increase the security that Microsoft or other organizations already have in mind, you also have to go back all the way to very fundamental things like, do you have cybersecurity training for your employees? Do they know how to sniff out a phishing email? That's where the amount of fraud that comes at organizations of all sizes, is significant. And that is where data breaches are most likely to occur through an untrained junior level employee that doesn't understand, the risks that are present when they get a phishing email from the CEO saying, hey, I need you to, approve this thing, or whatever. I mean, there's just a reality to the level of sophistication of where vulnerabilities will be emerging. And so it's both really addressing your cybersecurity policy, which should be a part of any data governance and AI policy as well, but also like not taking for granted the importance of getting A, the fundamentals right, but B, going back to basic training on cybersecurity. Because it's one thing to make the big high dollar investment in the technology itself. It's another thing to it's actually unethical to not train your staff to be aware of the risks that fly at them through these kind of fraudulent attacks that could cripple an organization. So it's a bit of a both and there, Mark.
Yeah, no, that's a bold statement that you just made, but I think there's merit to it for sure. Your point about skilling. You talked about security and the capabilities required there. You also talked about data. To go back to Chantal's point in her introduction about kind of where people are on that continuum in their adoption of AI, where we find a lot of the center of gravity right now is, as much as people want to get to AI, they really have to get their data management strategy figured out first. That's critical. And so we're spending a lot of time and working with organizations to get clear on that. And along with that comes all the security that's required. Thank you. Thank you both for sort of fielding these questions as they come in here. Getting us back on track a little bit. We've talked about this idea of change management. We've talked about the different variables that need to be considered as you think about capacity building with your stakeholders, as you think about a governance policy. I'm curious, when it comes to that communication with your board or with your stakeholders, whomever that may be, what are your thoughts on how to maintain a good continuous kind of feedback loop with your stakeholders on as you go through that AI journey? It's not like, you decide you're going to go into AI and then the next day you are, right? It's a journey. Any thoughts on how to make sure you nurture that support along the way? Question for either of you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there, having led several orgs through that journey. What I would say is, first and foremost, ground your AI journey in real need. So right now, to many stakeholders, AI feels like an add-on. But when you're, for example, answering several questions around use cases in the chat, if you are the person stewarding AI in your organization, start by asking people, what are the most time-consuming parts of their job? What are the most painful parts of their job? Don't ask them about AI. Start with, what is painful for you and onerous and time-consuming? And you will unearth things that can be addressed with the business productivity aspects of AI. So if you start there, your journey is addressing a very real need in your organization. Now, for those of you stewarding this work, you'll know that that's the starting point of your roadmap. So you'll know that your discovery around pragmatic use cases then leads to experimentation, guardrails concurrent with that, training concurrent with that. Experimentation leads to planned evaluation of those pilots, of those experiments, and then you start to build the groundwork for perhaps some more sophisticated buy or build endeavors in your organization. So if you have that roadmap laid out and you communicate the journey that you're about to take with your stakeholders, and then you regularly check in along that journey, you build a good deal of trust with the organization. You build trust that this will be not an add-on, that this will be address highly relevant need within the organization, that there will be measurement and reflection points that allow stakeholders to adapt or change course. and that the org can dream into the possibility that innovation will be possible through this journey, but you're not going to start right there because there's real pressing need to address. So that was both a meta as well as some pragmatic recommendations for just having a blueprint and using that blueprint and communicating regularly to it.
Great. Thank you, Chantal. Ben, any thoughts?
I would just say, like, everything that she was saying was, to me, was so spot on, and so I very much agree with everything that Chantal just said. I do think, it is appropriate to draw not a hard line, but a dotted line between some of the productivity use cases and some of the things that are right in front of folks, through tools like Copilot and many others that are right there for their benefit. And the dotted line is to try to differentiate how to improve productivity, differentiated from how AI can be implemented in a more sophisticated use case to actually solve a programmatic problem or to accomplish your programmatic outcomes. And so the danger is that the AI conversation can blur between those two things. And I would just say that we have tried to create a dotted line. We have an inventory of approved use cases of AI and tools that folks can use, and we're training on those. And that can feel, actually, to be super honest, it can just feel fun. One of the things that's really important about AI is that it's fun. Like, there are some really fun ways to improve your life with some of these tools. And so it doesn't have to be scary, and everything's not dangerous. At the same time, a lot of it is. And that's where I would draw some of these dotted lines to have a more nuanced conversation that feels a little bit more serious. But we consistently find that employees' minds are blown when we bring them tools that have been approved and vetted by our committee that just light bulbs go off, and it just makes it feel like a gift, as opposed to this big looming dark scary black box, which tends to be where the agent driven, big data driven, data lake driven stuff can get pretty scary. So I would encourage to try to have some fun with it too.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, Ben. And it's interesting, as you were describing that, I'm thinking of several organizations that we're working with who, with all the right intention have, started out with, like a BHAG of sorts, kind of like we're going to solve this, perennial problem that we've always had with AI. And they are working toward that effort, but what they're finding is the smaller incremental earnings and learnings along the way. And a lot of that is grassroots. A lot of that is getting the tool in a safe environment, in people's hands. To your point, Chantal, making sure in an equitable way that they're skilled and knowledgeable. You'd be amazed at where some of the best use cases are coming from. It's from the people that have to do these things every day. So great point. We're tracking toward the top of the hour here. I want to try to answer one more question from the chat before we close, and that is, so many people seem to hold themselves up as informed experts on AI. How does one find an appropriate resource locally to help us wade through this waterfall of information? Any thoughts on guidance on how to find a good Sherpa for AI?
Oh, I felt like I was searching for a Sherpa for like 2 years, and so I just really will fail on this one. I don't think it's as easy as it sounds, honestly. And I would just say that anything that philanthropy can do to create the right environment for organizations to have access to a Sherpa would go a long way. I spent 2 years recruiting this gentleman to step onto our team as a fellow and help us with this. And so the challenge, I think, with identifying the right Sherpa, if you will, is that as we all know, AI is evolving at a speed that is impossible to actually keep up with. There's not one person that even can keep up with it. And so I do think that there are people that can serve as interlocutors, that can at least point us in the right direction. But the one Sherpa concept to me feels aspirational.
Yeah.
I am an AI Sherpa. And so I know that there are not enough of us because, I'm not getting enough sleep at night currently. And so what I will say, I mean, this is my pitch to philanthropy. At Annenberg, when we asked our nonprofit grantees what they needed, we thought it might be money, micro funds for tools. You know what was number one? Access to strategy. They wanted strategic advice on leveraging AI. Number two, again, not money. Number two was training on AI. Now, number three was money. So that's a three-legged stool that I saw when I was CEO at the Tech Association of Grantmakers: strategy, skills, and funding. So
Yeah.
I would love to make a pitch for philanthropy to offer all three to contingencies and cohorts of your grantees, because they need all three. They need all
Awesome.
three.
Thank you. Thank you both for those responses. And we've had some other questions in the chat, which we will make best effort to make sure we get answers. But as we wrap up here, 4 minutes left. Chantal and Ben, I would just ask you both, are there 2 or 3 things that you might, encourage people to be doing if they're not already doing? And in addition to some of the actions that we're recommending here, any last minute guidance that you'd offer to the audience today on their AI journey?
Yep, I'll go after it and just offer some very practical pieces that I've already mentioned. And so specifically for the nonprofit colleagues on the call, I would just say, I've stared down those scope of work documents that cause any executive director to like shake in their boots to spend 6 figures on aligning their tech stack with a data strategy, with a cybersecurity strategy. And I know how harrowing that is. My encouragement to you, and maybe this is the one thing I'll say, and that is, if there ever was a time to get your tech stack aligned, and particularly your CRM against your right data strategy in the cloud, it's now, because this is going to be a race, and there will be really big implications for how this race goes, and your organization getting that aligned. If it's not aligned today, it is the right investment. Those are hard investments to make. And I would encourage you that if you're on the fence about it, I'd go all in.
Yeah, love it. Thank you.
All
Ben,
right, my
Chantal?
parting thought:
Yeah.
recruit or build tech literacy on your board of directors. It all trickles down from there. They will invest in staffing, in funding to do all the things Ben just described. But if they don't get it, they're not going to allocate your resources toward it. And AI is just the latest in a wave of tech disruption. So you might as well leverage this moment to build the board of your dreams with tech literacy, because other waves will come, and then you'll be able to be proactive.
There you go. I love it. Chantal and Ben, thank you so much for joining us today for the dialogue. I don't know if you've been able to keep up with the chat, but we got some energy going there. Appreciate it. So thank you for your perspectives. I think they were valued by our attendees today. I also want to thank the Chronicle of Philanthropy for hosting us today. And last but not least, our events coordinator, Christina Macchiarola, for pulling this all together. So for everyone that was able to join us today, thank you so much for investing the time, and good luck with your AI journey. Thanks so much, everyone.